I was sitting in a high-rise office in Shenzhen, looking out at a skyline that seemed to have materialized almost overnight, talking to a tech founder who had just pivoted his entire logistics chain in 48 hours. No board meetings, no 3-year permits, no mountain of compliance filings, just movement. When I asked her how he navigated the regulatory minefield, expecting him to pull out a thick binder of licenses or mention a cousin in the local ministry, he just laughed and pointed out the window at the frantic, shifting traffic below. "It's not a minefield," he said, "it's a river. You don't ask the water for permission, you just find the current that hasn't been dammed yet." To a Western eye, the scene looked like total, unregulated chaos, a frantic scramble where anything goes until a bureaucrat suddenly decides it doesn't. We are conditioned to the Berlin way. The world of 800-page environmental permits, years of court challenges, and a predetermined script for every brick laid. We call it the rule of law. But watching this founder work, I realized he wasn't breaking rules. He was playing a completely different game. He didn't care about how things were done. He only cared about where they were forbidden. The real turn, however, came later that evening. I mentioned a rival startup that had been shuttered by the state in a single afternoon. I expected him to be outraged by the arbitrary power or the lack of due process. Instead, he just shrugged, his expression turning cold and pragmatic. "They tried to build a bridge where headquarters had already marked a dam," he said. "They weren't navigating, they were trespassing." That instantaneous shift from fluid entrepreneurial freedom to a chilling acceptance of absolute central control left me stunned. It revealed a logic we rarely discuss. The idea that it's okay to have total liberty in the navigable terrain as long as you never touch the invisible boundaries. We keep waiting for China's economy to collapse under its own authoritarian weight. But what if we've been looking for the wrong kind of order? What if China has invented something entirely new? A cybernetic form of governance that doesn't give you directions, but simply redraws the map while you're still driving. Okay, let's unpack this. That anecdote, it gets right to the heart of what we're diving into today.
It really does. It's such a perfect illustration.
We are exploring what is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, arguably the most significant innovation in governing philosophy since the rise of liberal democracy.
It's a fundamental fork in the road, for sure.
It's a complete divergence in how a massive society manages its economy, its technology, everything. At its core, we're talking about two totally different ways to manage complexity.
Right. One controls the means, and the other, as the story shows, controls the ends.
So what's fascinating here is getting a clear definition of those two approaches.
Well, let's start with the one we're more familiar with, the Western model, what you call the Berlin way. That's what we can call operational governance.
Okay, operational.
The structural logic behind it is all about specifying the means. It's like giving someone, incredibly detailed turn-by-turn directions.
Step 1, fill out this form. Step 2, file it with this department.
Exactly. Step 1 through 1,000, detailing precisely how you must build your factory or launch your product. It prioritizes procedural consistency, the process itself, above almost anything else.
So if operational governance is the incredibly detailed manual, then the other system, this river, what are we calling that?
We're calling it positional governance, and it's the complete opposite. It specifies the ends, or maybe more accurately, the forbidden ends.
So it doesn't tell you how to do something.
Not at all. It just shows you the map and says, see these areas, they're marked off limits, don't go there. Those are the invisible boundaries.
But everything else?
Everything else, the entire unmarked territory on that map is what the founder called navigable terrain. It's where the entrepreneur of the company, the local official, is completely free to innovate and execute as they see fit, maximizing for speed and for efficiency.
So that's the core difference, procedural versus positional.
Rules versus boundaries. That's the critical differentiator. And it means for a company operating in that kind of positional space, the whole regulatory experience is inverted. It's turned on its head.
We're not focused on ticking boxes.
No, not primarily. They aren't spending all their time on compliance forms and detailed process adherence. They're focused on understanding the intent of the system. They have to ask, where are the real boundaries? Where is that forbidden territory? And what's the strategic direction, the lighthouse that I need to be sailing towards?
That Makes so much sense. So our mission for this deep dive is to really get into this positional framework. We need to understand the logic behind it, how it can possibly scale across more than 1 billion people.
And how it fuels this incredible speed of development we keep seeing.
Exactly. And crucially, what all of this implies for global competition, especially in these really complex, fast-moving fields like AI, green energy, you name it.
We're going to see how, in the 21st century, maybe the highest form of state capacity isn't rigid control. It's the ability to adapt instantly.
Okay, so this is where the theory gets very, very real. If you want to see a head-to-head comparison of operational governance versus positional governance, you just have to look at industrial mega projects.
Right.
And we have, the perfect global case study for this.
We do. It's the tale of two factories. Same company, Tesla, same goal, build a gigafactory, but in two completely different systems just a few years apart.
Let's start with the Berlin way, the factory in Brandenburg, Germany.
Right. So operating under that procedural operational governance model, the Tesla site there involved years of delays. Years.
And not because of engineering problems.
No, not at all. It was court challenges over potential environmental impacts, everything from, water consumption to the impact on the local bata population and forests. Procedurally, the company had to submit over 800 pages of applications.
800 pages.
Just for the environmental permits. And each one of those had to be assessed, debated, and challenged through every single level of the legal and administrative system.
That number just says it all. 800 pages of permits. That is the sheer crushing weight of procedural bureaucracy.
It is. The system is designed, in a way, to slow things down. It's meant to ensure that every single step follows every single pre-existing rule and subclause.
It prioritizes the how, the sanctity of the process.
And the result is you get process consistency.
Yeah.
You get legal certainty. But you also get massive, massive deceleration. It's robust, but it is inherently slow.
Okay. So that's one side of the coin. Now let's compare that to the Tesla Gigafactory in Shanghai.
A completely different story. That facility went from being literally a muddy, undeveloped field to being in full mass production, shipping cars off the line in just 357 days.
Under a year.
Elon Musk himself, who was not easily impressed by speed, called it mind-blowing.
The contrast is it's jarring. It's not just a little bit faster. It's an entirely different category of speed. It feels like a difference in structural commitment.
It is. And the key is that the Shanghai build wasn't achieved by just ignoring regulations. It was achieved by fundamentally changing the nature of the regulatory process.
How so?
Well, we've seen accounts from some of the site engineers who worked on that Shanghai project. And they described the process not as, construction managed by filing paperwork, but as a clearing of the path.
A clearing of the path. I love that description.
Think about what that implies. It suggests an active facilitating government. The local officials weren't sitting in an office somewhere waiting for forms to be filed and stamped.
They were on site?
They were physically walking the site with Tesla's engineers, identifying roadblocks, both administrative and physical, and then actively removing them in real time.
So the government's focus wasn't on how Tesla was pouring the concrete or scheduling its labor.
No. Their focus was positional. It was remove obstacles, get this thing built, and make sure it adheres to the broad national boundaries. And the biggest boundary, or rather the biggest lighthouse goal, was the national push for new energy vehicles, or NEVs.
So the project was aligned with the national strategy.
Perfectly aligned. And that is the positional logic made manifest. The commitment is relentlessly on the result. It's on getting that physical output, those cars, into the economy. When you look at the factory, the critical question from the government side isn't, did they follow Procedure 27B? It's, is this project achieving the desired positional outcome for our national strategy?
And if the answer is yes...
If the answer is yes, the full state capacity, the ability of the government to get massive things done is amplified immensely. It turns what would be years of bureaucratic delay into a real-time problem-solving exercise.
And that speed, of course, gave Tesla a huge competitive edge. They didn't just build the factory fast, they got to market fast.
A massive edge. The Gigafactory was an immediate success. It helped Tesla basically dominate the EV market in China in its very first year. And that success was a direct result of them exploiting that positional opening the government created.
It wasn't an accident.
Not at all. The state made it crystal clear. NEV development is a top national goal. So they relaxed the joint venture rules specifically for foreign EV makers. This allowed Tesla to operate a wholly owned facility, which is a much less bureaucratic model than its foreign competitors had ever faced before.
And this all fits into that bigger goal, right? the 2025 target for NEVs.
Exactly. The goal is for NEVs to make up 25% of all vehicle sales by 2025. Accelerating Tesla's success aligns perfectly with that national position.
So if we pull back, the key takeaway here seems to be adaptability, the speed of adaptation.
That's it. Positional adjustment is structurally, systematically faster than procedural revision. Think about it. When conditions change, a new technology emerges, a global supply chain gets disrupted, a procedural system has to go through legislative cycles.
Which can take months or even years.
Right, to rewrite those 800-page manuals. But a positional shift, redefining the boundaries or just reprioritizing that lighthouse goal, that can happen almost immediately through an administrative decree.
And that speed difference is the ultimate competitive advantage right now.
In an era defined by high complexity and uncertainty, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're trying to move at the speed of technological innovation, that slow, prescriptive manual becomes an anchor holding you back.
But the positional map allows you to make rapid course correction.
Exactly. It maximizes efficiency by just reducing the friction between government oversight and market execution. It's kind of lean governance, where you focus your oversight only on the most critical boundaries that matter for the national interest.
Okay, the speed in Shanghai is incredible, but that brings up a huge question. How do you scale that? How do you get that kind of instant agility across a country as enormous and diverse as China?
Right. It can't all be managed from a single office in Beijing. That would just create an information bottleneck of epic proportions. It would be chaos.
So how does it work?
This is where we get into the structural genius of the system. To really get your head around how this distributed agility works, you have to use the corporate metaphor.
The corporate metaphor.
It's a metaphor used by Chinese entrepreneurs and officials themselves. They see China's entire governance structure as being architecturally accurate to a massive, highly competitive corporation.
That's a powerful image. So Beijing is headquarters.
Beijing is HQ. It sets the big picture, the overarching strategic direction. You know, the 5-year plans, the major national goals.
And the provinces, the big cities.
There's a highly competitive corporate divisions. And the businesses themselves, the Teslas and the startups, they're the agile project teams on the ground.
Okay, that clarifies things a lot. So HQ, the center, sets those core positional boundaries and long-term goals, things like the green energy transition or tech self-reliance.
Exactly. But, and this is the key part, the provinces and cities are not just passive order takers. They are actively, fiercely competing with each other for investment, for talent, for national recognition.
It's just like corporate divisions would compete for budget and resources inside a huge company like General Electric or something.
Precisely. And that competition is what makes it all work. It ensures that local officials aren't just bureaucrats following a script. They're incentivized to innovate, to find new ways to grow their region's economy.
So as long as they deliver results, and those results are measured in things like GDP growth, innovation output,
And crucially, as long as they adhere to those core national principles set by HQ.
they have a huge amount of freedom to operate locally.
A tremendous amount of latitude. It creates this powerful system that you could almost call directed improvisation.
Directed improvisation, I like that. And the incentive structure is what oils the whole machine.
It's everything. A local official knows that if they achieve rapid growth, if they attract a high-value industry like Tesla to their city, that secures their promotion, it secures more resources from the center, it makes them a star.
So they're highly motivated to find ways around the usual bureaucratic sludge. They're actively looking for strategic openings within those big positional boundaries.
Always. Which brings us to a perfect example of this in action. The story of the city official in Hefei.
Right, the official who acted more like a venture capitalist than a bureaucrat. What happened there?
So this was during a time when the new energy vehicle sector was really heating up, but it was still incredibly risky. A lot of startups were burning through cash.
A familiar story.
And there was one major EV startup that was in deep financial trouble. Now, in a traditional operational system, what would a provincial government do? They'd probably wait for a central mandate or just let the market sort it out, constrained by strict state aid rules.
Right, they wouldn't want to get blamed if the investment went sour.
But in Hefei, the provincial government didn't wait. They looked at the map, they analyzed the strategic boundaries set by Beijing, the clear national push for green energy and EV innovation, and they saw a positional opportunity.
So they weren't consulting some 3-year administrative plan, they were navigating the map of intent.
Exactly. And they moved fast. They executed a really complex financial maneuver, injecting capital, providing land resources, and basically anchoring that entire fledgling EV industry right there in their area.
They saw a chance to grab a high-value industrial position for their region, and they moved like a private equity firm, not a government agency.
That's the agility of the positional system in action at the provincial level. Because they knew, if this works, if we deliver results that align with the national direction, we'll be rewarded with more autonomy and more resources. It was a calculated, high-stakes bet.
This decentralized system, with all these regions acting as these semi-autonomous, competitive units, must be an incredible engine for generating new ideas that can then be scaled up nationally.
Oh, it's a huge engine. Economists have a term for this. They call it generating discovery procedures.
Discovery procedures?
Because the regions are all competing and improvising different solutions under that broad central direction, they're essentially running a series of parallel competitive experiments across the country.
So you get to see what actually works in practice.
Right. Just look at the strategic specializations we see. It wasn't centrally planned that Shenzhen would become the world's capital for advanced hardware and manufacturing.
Or that Hangzhou would become the global hub for e-commerce, birthing a giant like Alibaba.
Exactly. Or Shanghai, focusing on financial services and high-end manufacturing. These different approaches evolve because local leaders leverage their unique local advantages and ingenuity. They weren't just stamping out copies of a centrally prescribed model.
And the strength there is that the whole system can learn incredibly fast.
It's rapid systemic learning. A successful pattern, whether it's a new way to manage city traffic, a new financial regulatory sandbox, or a new industrial cluster model, can be identified very quickly.
And then scaled across the whole system.
While, and this is just as important, the failures remain localized. They stay contained. A small regional mistake doesn't become a national crisis.
Which allows the whole system to learn and adapt without HQ needing to be omniscient. They don't have to know all the answers in advance.
They just need to be good at recognizing success when it emerges from one of their competitive divisions. And the result is a governing system that's incredibly pragmatic, flexible, and fundamentally adaptive. And that really has been the bedrock of China's economic rise.
Okay, so if you have these competitive divisions constantly improvising and the central boundaries are fluid, not written in stone, then all the local actors, especially entrepreneurs, they need a massive amount of real-time information.
A constant flow.
Right, to navigate the space without making that fatal mistake. The founder in the intro described trespassing into a forbidden zone. So how do they get this navigational intelligence if the rules aren't in a 1,000-page manual?
This is where the human element becomes structurally essential. It's not just a nice to have. Positional governance relies heavily, fundamentally, on deep, dense relationship networks.
Which you could call a kind of navigation infrastructure.
That's a great way to put it, a navigation infrastructure. When the map is constantly being redrawn, or the terrain is just inherently uncertain because it's a new industry, you have to rely on a human GPS system to read the shifting contours.
This is something Western observers often see and, I think, immediately misinterpret.
Completely.
Yeah.
They look for the formalized procedural transparency they're used to. They look for the written rules.
And when they see that relationships and networks are mediating information, they tend to just reduce it to favor trading or corruption.
Because they're looking at it through a procedural lens. And through that lens, it's broken. But that misses the strategic value of these networks entirely.
So in a positional system, these networks aren't about bribery to break a rule.
It's much less about that and much more about building relationships that provide crucial navigational assistance. For an entrepreneur like the one in Shenzhen, that network provides real-time intelligence about where the safe passages are, what the emerging national priorities are, and most importantly, where those boundary lines are subtly being moved.
It goes back to the founder's analogy. Following the lighthouse of national goals, but also understanding the subtle movements of the shifting buoys.
The network helps you read the intent behind the map, not just the static printed regulations. By cultivating and relying on that dense relational network, the entrepreneur is constantly getting signals about where the current is flowing and, crucially, where the state is preparing to build a dam.
Which is what allows for those incredibly strategic and rapid pivots, like changing your whole logistics chain in 2 days.
Exactly. And this flow of information also does something else. It dramatically lowers transaction costs compared to an operational system.
How so?
Well, in a procedural system, you have to maintain these huge, elaborate compliance departments. Their entire job is paper adherence and mitigating liability. In this system, that focuses on efficiency and alignment with the goal. The network provides that alignment information much more cheaply.
And this relational flow of information, this human GPS, is also the secret ingredient for rapid innovation. It enables what some Chinese entrepreneurs call strategic invisibility.
Strategic invisibility. It's such a key concept. It's the ability to innovate in these emerging spaces that the government hasn't even fully mapped or understood yet.
So the government intentionally holds back.
It holds back on creating rigid procedures, allowing experimentation to happen within broad but clearly defined positional limits.
The emergence of mobile payments, Alipay, WeChat Pay, that's the textbook example of this, isn't it?
It's the perfect one. When they first emerged, they were completely unregulated. There were no procedures for mobile transactions because the technology was brand new.
A procedural system might have just banned it or tried to cram it into old banking laws.
Right, and that would have suffocated the innovation immediately. Instead, the government allowed experimentation within those broad positional boundaries.
And what were those boundaries?
They were very clear and very high level. 1, do not threaten core financial stability. 2, do not facilitate massive systemic fraud. And 3, do not challenge the state's ultimate monetary sovereignty.
And everything inside those lines was fair game.
Everything within those limits was greenlit for innovation. And what happened? The private sector created an entirely new payment infrastructure from the ground up, one that integrated so deeply into daily life that China was able to leapfrog the established, slower, card-based systems that still dominate much of the West.
And by the time the formal regulations were introduced,
they weren't based on some abstract theory. They were informed by years of real-world, high-volume operational success. This makes the regulations far more practical and adaptive from day one.
That flexibility is really the difference between needing permission to innovate, which is the burden of procedural systems,
and only needing forgiveness if you fail, which is the reality of the positional system, as long as you never ever stray into that forbidden territory.
And this is the approach that provides the flexibility needed for big breakthroughs in really complex areas.
Right.
AI, quantum computing, big infrastructure projects where you just can't define all the procedures in advance.
It's impossible. You have to let people navigate.
Okay, but this system sounds so flexible, it's almost self-organizing, which brings up the crucial question. How does the center, how does headquarters maintain absolute control?
Yeah.
How do you prevent the whole thing from just dissolving into local chaos or regional misdirection? How is that chilling moment when the rival founder was shut down in an afternoon? How is that practically enforced?
That is the ultimate question. The entire system is disciplined by what we can call the headquarters override.
The headquarters override.
It's the center's capability to instantaneously and fundamentally reshape the entire navigational terrain when the integrity of the system or a core strategic boundary is threatened.
So that immediate shift that the founder described from this fluid entrepreneurial freedom to that cold, pragmatic acceptance of central control, that is the enforcement mechanism.
It's the credible threat of total terrain transformation. That's what enforces the boundaries.
Yeah.
The central government doesn't need to monitor every single transaction or check every local official's procedural checklist.
Because the mere threat of the override keeps everyone aligned.
It maintains voluntary alignment among all the local actors. Think about the famous shift in environmental policy.
Yeah.
When the central leadership declared that, quote, clear waters and green mountains are better than gold and silver mountains, that was not a suggestion to be debated in a provincial legislature. That was an override.
And overnight, positions that had been incredibly profitable, like heavy polluting industries, suddenly became completely untenable.
The center signaled a massive boundary shift, and every provincial governor, every city mayor, every entrepreneur knew in that instant that they had to pivot immediately, or they would face a shutdown, just like that rival startup.
So this knowledge of the center's capability, it shapes behavior long before the center ever has to actually intervene.
It encourages a constant process of self-monitoring and voluntary alignment with the national strategic direction. Everyone knows their navigational freedom is contingent on their respect for the established positions and the ultimate absolute authority of the headquarters override.
Let's ground the structural analysis in some more real-world applications. We've talked about the speed of factory building and the agility in finance. But how does this agile, boundary-based system handle a massive, unexpected, all-encompassing challenge? Let's start with the global pandemic.
Okay. The COVID-19 response really demonstrated the speed advantage of positional governance on a national scale. It was a huge test.
It certainly was.
When the central government declared that epidemic control was the immediate, non-negotiable priority, the terrain shifted, instantly and completely. The number one national positional priority went from economic development to epidemic prevention.
And the speed and scope of that reorganization, mobilizing resources, locking down cities, building hospitals, it was a direct result of that positional alignment.
It had to be. Subordinate actors, from provincial governors all the way down to neighborhood committees, knew that action was the only thing that mattered. Procedural limitations were secondary to achieving that central positional goal of control.
And this response was supercharged by the digital infrastructure that was already in place.
It was hypercharged. The introduction of the mandatory mobile QR health code system, which was seamlessly integrated into platforms people already used, like Alipay, was critical.
And this wasn't a slow, phased rollout with months of public debate.
No, it was the rapid, nationwide deployment of a tool that monitored and controlled population movements using big data. You needed it to get on the subway, to go to your workplace, even to get into your own residential compound. The positional framework enabled that swift and massive application of high-tech monitoring at scale.
That speed and decisiveness is clearly an advantage in a crisis, where time is the single most critical variable. But let's move beyond crisis management to long-term economic growth. How does this structure underpin China's role as the factory of the world?
It's a great question because China's manufacturing dominance isn't just about cheap labor or sheer scale anymore. It is structurally engineered through the positional system, and especially through that model of competitive federalism we talked about.
And a big part of that is the specialty town approach, right?
Yes, the mass specialization of entire towns into single product clusters. It's an incredible phenomenon.
Give us some of the classic examples.
Well, the most famous is probably Yiwu. It's responsible for a truly staggering percentage of the world's Christmas decorations and other small commodities.
The world's Christmas decorations, it's amazing.
Then you have a city like Huludao, which has become a global powerhouse in swimwear production. I've seen reports that manufactures something like a quarter of the entire world supply.
A quarter of all swimwear.
And Wenzhou for shoes, Zhongshan for lighting fixtures, the list goes on and on. These clusters form these near vertical supply chains where every necessary supplier, all the logistics, all the skilled labor is consolidated in one small geographic area.
And this sounds like a perfect example of those competitive local officials. They identify a niche and then just double down on it to maximize efficiency without waiting for some central plan to tell them what to do.
That's exactly what it is. The local officials, acting like those corporate division heads, are incentivized to become the absolute best in the world at one thing. They secure the investment, they build the infrastructure, and they allow manufacturers to achieve an efficiency that's almost impossible to compete with.
The success of Huludao in swimwear directly benefits the political standing of its local leaders.
Absolutely. And then something else happened that changed these towns profoundly. The rise of domestic e-commerce platforms like Alibaba and Pinduoduo.
Right. It must have totally rewired them.
It did. The e-commerce boom gave these thousands of highly specialized small and medium enterprises direct access to hundreds of millions of customers, both at home and increasingly abroad.
So they didn't have to be just passive contract factories anymore, waiting for an order from a big Western brand.
Exactly. It forced them to evolve. They're now developing their own brands, they're competing directly on the open market, and they're leveraging the massive economies of scale that were already built into their specialized towns. It's this incredible adaptive evolution, all fueled by new market access.
So even with all the talk of decoupling and companies trying to diversify their supply chains, the gravitational pull of this hyper-efficient adaptive environment must still be immense.
It is. I mean, the geopolitical rhetoric drives diversification, but the reality on the ground is that the advantages in speed, state capacity, and this integrated infrastructure remain globally unmatched for many products.
And it's crucial to remember that the private sector is the engine driving all of this inside this directed system.
Yes, we often hear about the big state-owned enterprises, but the dynamism, the innovation, is coming from elsewhere.
The numbers are pretty stark, aren't they?
The private sector is absolutely central. It contributes an estimated 60% of GDP and drives around 70% of all innovation. Companies like Tencent, Alibaba, DJI, they aren't passive government tools. They're the essential innovation drivers who are leveraging the positional freedom they have in that navigable terrain.
They're almost co-pilots in the national strategy.
As long as they stay within those core boundaries, yes, they're essential.
So let's bring it full circle. Back to Tesla as the ultimate case study of a foreign company not just succeeding, but winning by mastering this positional governance.
Tesla's success wasn't an accident. It was a masterclass in recognizing and exploiting a positional opening.
The government made the position clear. We want NEVs to succeed.
They broadcast it loud and clear, and they backed it up. They relaxed the procedural rules like the joint venture requirement. They provided massive administrative support, the clearing of the path, and they offered huge consumer incentives, like free green license plates in Shanghai, which were worth a fortune.
And Tesla just saw that clear signal and aligned its entire strategy with it.
They raced toward that lighthouse, knowing that the system was structurally designed to reward that speed and that alignment. They accelerated right past their global competition.
It's win-win cooperation in the most literal sense of the phrase.
It is. The state sets the position for success, and whoever occupies that position most effectively, whether they're a domestic firm or a foreign one, receives the amplified support of the system's immense state capacity. This acceleration mechanism is an incredibly powerful tool for driving rapid industrial and technological transformation. So when we pull all of this together, what we've really been analyzing today is a systematic governance approach that seems uniquely suited for the kind of relentless complexity and speed that defines the 21st century.
And it creates this fundamental misunderstanding in global discussions. When Western leaders talk about economic fairness, they demand a level playing field.
But what they mean by that is uniform procedures. They want everyone to follow the same detailed script, the operational approach.
Whereas when the positional system talks about win-win cooperation, it means something completely different.
It means mutually beneficial positions. It's a scenario where different actors are free to achieve outcomes however they want, using their own methods, as long as they stay within those boundaries set by the center and contribute to the system's overall strategic goals.
The comparison between the two logics really is stark when you lay it out like that. One system, the procedural one, is just inherently slow. It's burdened by legislative cycles, by the need for consistency, and the sheer difficulty of rewriting those incredibly detailed rulebooks for every new situation.
While the other, the positional system, is hyper-adaptive. It's designed to incorporate vast amounts of local, real-time information through that distributed navigation, the human GPS we talked about. It achieves order not by controlling every single operation from the top down,
but by shaping the positions that its actors are allowed to occupy. It's a completely different way of thinking about order itself.
And in a world of increasing complexity and technological uncertainty, the system that can adapt faster, that can incorporate more distributed information, and that can enable more parallel experimentation, is structurally positioned to define what comes next. The ability to dynamically navigate uncertainty is proving to be a much stronger imperative than the ability to follow predetermined, static procedures. This model really reconceives governance as a form of dynamic boundary management, which enables a rapid and highly efficient response to the economic and technological challenges we're all facing.